Mel Brooks has achieved every major entertainment accolade imaginable, yet he recently stunned the industry by releasing a brutally honest list that nobody saw coming, the 6 iconic actors he genuinely hated working with on his cinematic sets. This is not a standard piece of Hollywood gossip, nor is it a bitter retirement complaint. It is a profound, deeply complex psychological paradox wrapped in decades of showbiz mayhem. The very individuals who helped him construct his multi-million-dollar comedic empire were the exact same people who routinely drove him to the absolute brink of psychological madness. He loved them as family, yet their fierce independence, structural defiance, and unyielding perfectionism turned his historical film sets into exhausting battlefields of creative warfare. Behind the glittering illusion of effortless cinematic magic lies a raw narrative of broken cameras, endless delays, and an intense friction that nearly shattered the director's sanity. To truly understand why the king of comedy harbored such intense frustration toward his greatest collaborators, one must look beneath the glittering surface of his golden era and examine the root wound of his creative process. Mel Brooks did not inherit his legendary status. He forged it through the unforgiving grit of the early 20th century, surviving the horrors of World War II as an army engineer before fighting for pennies in the competitive comedy trenches of the Catskills. In that cutthroat environment, silence was the ultimate enemy, and a single poorly timed joke could instantly end a writer's career, instilling in him a desperate need for absolute control over every frame. When he finally transitioned to big-budget Hollywood filmmaking, carrying the immense financial weight of multi-million-dollar studio investments, he expected absolute discipline from his performers to combat the chaotic nature of the business. Instead, he found himself surrounded by a volatile group of brilliant eccentrics who refused to be managed completely, upending his meticulous plans with their own disruptive genius. He quickly learned that the path to cinematic immortality was paved with intense interpersonal conflict, forcing him to wage a daily war against the very talent he hired. The first individual to systematically dismantle Mel's psychological defenses was a man whose weapon of choice was not malice or arrogance, but an uncontrollable, infectious burst of pure human laughter. Dom DeLuise was a comedic force of nature, but on a tightly scheduled movie set where every single minute cost thousands of dollars, his presence quickly became an absolute logistical nightmare for the director. Dom did not merely chuckle, he completely collapsed under the weight of his own amusement, bursting into violent fits of giggles before the camera could even finish rolling. During the filming of classical hits like silent movie Spaceballs and Robin Hood Men in Tights, Mel found himself forced to shout the word "cut" 50 times a day, because Dom simply could not look at his co-stars without losing total control of his faculties. A single raised eyebrow from Madeline Kahn or a subtle smirk from Harvey Korman would instantly send Dom into a 45-minute spiral of breathless gasping, entirely halting the production while the expensive crew stood around waiting. Desperate to salvage his budget, Mel resorted to desperate technical maneuvers, deliberately staging cameras away from Dom's face and forcing him to deliver lines to blank walls. This mechanical separation rarely worked because Dom's vibrant energy refused to be contained by structural boundaries, transforming every scene into a high-stakes gamble against the ticking clock. Mel routinely lost his temper, throwing his director's cap to the ground and screaming for professional decorum, only to watch Dom offer him a warm plate of homemade pasta cooked right in the dressing room. This bizarre backstage dynamic created an intense emotional whiplash, blending professional fury with a deep, unbreakable fraternal love that defined their lifelong relationship. The director openly admitted that firing the chaotic actor was completely out of the question, because once the laughter subsided, the resulting take was always pure comedic gold. Dom brought an unteachable organic joy to the screen that elevated mediocre scripts into historic masterpieces, proving that some structural messes are entirely worth making. He tested the director's patience more than any other performer in Hollywood history, transforming the rigid art of filmmaking into an unpredictable living celebration of human absurdity. He ruined the takes, but he saved the movie. if Dom DeLuise threatened the director's schedule with uncontrollable joy, Madeline Kahn disrupted his entire creative authority through a terrifying display of calculating, unyielding artistic perfectionism. Mel Brooks routinely proclaimed that Madeline was the most formidable comedic actress of her generation, yet working with her required an immense amount of psychological stamina that left him completely drained at the end of every shooting day. Madeline did not simply show up to read the words written on the page. She arrived with a metaphorical scalpel, picking every line apart, demanding extensive script rewrites, and questioning the historical validity of her elaborate costumes. She famously developed a habit of walking onto the set of Blazing Saddles and Young Frankenstein significantly late, completely unbothered by the waiting crew, carrying herself with a calm serenity that drove Mel into a silent internal fury. The moment the cameras began to roll, however, her absolute brilliance paralyzed any lingering anger, leaving the director stunned by the sheer magnitude of her theatrical transformations. As the unforgettable Lily von Stuppap, she delivered a performance so structurally precise that audiences still mimic her exact vocal cadence decades later. Behind that flawless performance lay an exhaustive game of creative chess, as Madeline constantly pushed to alter camera angles, change lighting setups, and manipulate the dialogue of her scene partners. During one particularly tense afternoon on the set of High Anxiety, she flatly refused to perform a crucial monologue because she believed the specific couch her character occupied did not align with the psychological profile of the role. Mel initially dismissed the demand as an act of standard diva behavior, but after a long, exhausting argument that delayed production for hours, he finally ordered a new piece of furniture to satisfy her vision. When he reviewed the developed film the following morning, he was forced to admit that her visual instinct was entirely correct. The replacement couch transformed the entire aesthetic of the sequence. This constant cycle of resistance and validation created an exhausting working relationship where Mel felt less like an authoritative director and more like a man trying to tame a wild storm. She forced him to defend his own creative choices, stripping away his directorial armor and demanding absolute excellence at every turn. She was a storm, but she left behind gold. The tension on Mel's sets reached an entirely different level of professional anxiety when he attempted to integrate the rigid world of classical dramatic method acting into his loose improvisational comedic universe. Gene Hackman entered the production of Young Frankenstein as an Academy Award-winning dramatic titan, joining the cast purely as a personal favor to Gene Wilder, after expressing a brief desire to experiment with a lighthearted role. He was cast as the Blind Hermit, a brief slapstick sequence that would eventually become one of the most celebrated moments in the history of American comedy. For Mel Brooks, however, directing Hackman felt like attempting to perform fluid, spontaneous jazz with a classical musician who refused to look away from a strictly printed textbook. Hackman approached the ridiculous soup-spilling character with the exact same intense, unblinking gravity that he utilized to portray hardened detectives and historical villains. While the rest of the cast spent their breaks joking around and eating lunch together, Hackman remained completely isolated in his trailer, intensely dissecting the subtext of a scene that involved accidentally setting a man's thumb on fire. This extreme commitment to dramatic realism created a palpable freezing cold atmosphere on the set that immediately stifled Mel's preferred method of rapid, high-energy filmmaking. Every time an ensemble actor broke character or giggled during a complicated take, Hackman would slowly turn his head and deliver a terrifying, silent glare that instantly sucked all the joy out of the room. He demanded extensive, repetitive technical rehearsals to ensure absolute physical precision, a structured approach that completely clashed with Mel's belief that genuine comedy is born from raw, unscripted human accidents. The director found himself walking on eggshells for the duration of Hackman's brief tenure, desperately trying to maintain a playful environment for his comedians while respecting the intense boundaries of a dramatic powerhouse. The resulting scene was an absolute triumph of structural contrast, as Hackman's completely straight, grounded performance made the absurdity surrounding him 10 times funnier than originally written. Despite the undeniable success of the sequence, Mel quietly resolved never to invite that level of dramatic intensity back into his chaotic world again. Comedy requires freedom. Hackman required control. The battle for creative dominance expanded significantly when Cloris Leachman entered the director's cinematic family, bringing with her an aggressive intellectual curiosity that turned every single scene into exhausting academic debate. Cloris was an actress of extraordinary psychological depth, but she possessed a fierce independence that made it entirely impossible for her to blindly follow a director's instructions. When Mel gave her a specific acting note on the sets of Young Frankenstein or High Anxiety, she would not nod her head. She would cross her arms, narrow her eyes, and demand a thorough, philosophical justification for the choice. If she found his directorial reasoning unsatisfactory, she would simply ignore his boundaries during the next take, executing the scene entirely her own way, while the crew watched in stunned silence. Mel frequently compared directing Cloris to the painful, impossible act of trying to ride a peeled horse, describing her as an elite athletic talent that refused to accept a bridle. As Frau Blücher, her terrifying stone-faced performance was entirely brilliant, but the journey to capturing that brilliance on film required a brutal daily war of attrition. Cloris firmly believed that her characters deserved a dark, grounded reality, whereas Mel wanted them to remain slightly cartoonish, fast-paced, and accessible to a mainstream commercial audience. They spent hours locked in quiet, intense arguments on the soundstage, refusing to back down from their respective artistic philosophies, while the production clock ticked away precious studio resources. Mel would beg her to deliver just one single take using his commercial timing, only to watch her deliver a version that was so emotionally devastating it completely altered the comedic tone of the movie. Yet the undeniable truth was that her stubborn defiance consistently yielded moments of cinematic history that Mel's script could never have anticipated on its own. She didn't care about making her directors comfortable, nor did she care about Hollywood praise. She only cared about the absolute emotional truth of the human being she was portraying. Her exhausting process forced Mel to step up his game, stripping away his reliance on cheap gags and forcing him to build richer, more enduring cinematic structures. She didn't want to follow. She wanted to understand. While some actors exhausted Mel through intellectual debate, his experience with Richard Pryor was a tragic narrative of what could have been a profound, artistic heartbreak that still lingers in the director's mind decades later. Richard Pryor was the brilliant, volatile co-writer of Blazing Saddles, a man whose raw, fearless comedic genius infused the script with its sharp racial commentary and its dangerous, revolutionary edge. Mel was completely enamored by Pryor's talent, openly stating that Richard was the absolute soul of the entire project, and he fought a desperate multi-month war with studio executives to cast him as the main character, Sheriff Bart. The Hollywood establishment, however, was deeply terrified of Pryor's chaotic personal life, his highly publicized battles with severe substance addiction, and his absolute refusal to conform to corporate structures. They viewed him as an unpredictable liability who might abandon the production at any moment, and they issued an absolute non-negotiable ultimatum to the director: find a new star or the movie gets permanently canceled. This corporate rejection absolutely devastated Mel, forcing him to cast the brilliant Cleavon Little instead, a choice that resulted in a classic performance but left Mel wondering about the dangerous masterpiece they could have made. Even during the writing phase, working directly with Pryor was an unpredictable exercise in waiting for lightning to strike an open field. Richard would show up to writing sessions 3 hours late, completely empty-handed, or sometimes he wouldn't show up at all, leaving the writing team entirely stranded while they tried to piece the narrative together. But on the days when he did arrive focused, his mind operated at a speed that left every other writer in the room completely breathless with awe and laughter. He would pace the room, shouting out brilliant monologues and tearing down cultural taboos with a razor-sharp precision that gave Blazing Saddles its legendary immortal bite. Mel had to manage a man who was constantly fighting his own internal demons, balancing a deep respect for his genius with the brutal reality of studio deadlines. His face was missing, but his voice was immortal. The most complex, exhausting, and emotionally charged working relationship of Mel's entire life occurred when he made the daring decision to direct the one person he loved above all others, his magnificent wife, Anne Bancroft. Anne was a towering dramatic actress, a revered Oscar winner who possessed an intimidating artistic intellect that never allowed Mel to hide behind his status as a legendary Hollywood director. When they joined forces to star in and produce the wartime comedy To Be or Not to Be, the comfortable boundaries of their 40-year marriage vanished, replaced by an intense professional friction. On the soundstage, Anne did not see an acclaimed filmmaker whose word was law. She saw her husband, a man whose creative flaws and structural shortcuts she knew better than anyone else on earth. She flatly refused to accept any vague direction, raising a single, terrifying eyebrow whenever he asked for more energy, and demanding that he explain the exact psychological motivation behind every line. This absolute lack of professional deference terrified Mel in front of his crew, forcing him to second-guess every single artistic note he delivered throughout the grueling production. Their arguments on set were never loud or abusive, but they carried an intense, quiet gravity that caused the surrounding crew members to slowly back away from the camera. Riggs. Anne fought relentlessly for character depth, refusing to play any scene strictly for a cheap laugh, forcing Mel to ground his performance alongside her to ensure the story maintained its emotional dignity. This constant, unyielding pressure pushed Mel to deliver the most mature, nuanced performance of his career, proving that her stubborn defiance was the ultimate act of creative love. They possessed an extraordinary ability to leave their intense professional warfare at the studio gates, transitioning seamlessly back into a deeply devoted, peaceful marriage the moment they arrived home. She knew exactly how to dismantle his ego with a single calculating look, using her intimate knowledge of his vulnerabilities to ensure he never settled for mediocrity. She didn't challenge his power, she preserved his truth. When Mel Brooks looks back from the extraordinary vantage point of 98 years, his self-proclaimed list of hatred reveals itself as a profound monument of deep, unyielding professional respect. He never desired quiet, submissive sets filled with compliant actors who simply hit their marks and read their lines without thought. He thrived exclusively within the roaring fires of creative chaos. The individuals he claims to have hated were the exact ones who refused to let him get away with easy choices, forcing him to fight for every single frame of his cinematic legacy. They broke his schedules, challenged his authority, and ruined his takes. But they also breathed immortal life into his vision, carving their names permanently into the bedrock of global comedy history. These historic clashes were not the destructive arguments of bitter enemies, but the essential, violent growing pains of timeless human collaboration. True art is never manufactured in a peaceful vacuum. It is violently forged through the intense friction of extraordinary minds, refusing to compromise their truth. Mel didn't hate these actors for making his job difficult. He loved them for making his movies great. Boring, predictable compliance never created a masterpiece that could survive the ruthless test of time. And Mel Brooks understood that beautiful secret better than anyone else who ever picked up a megaphone. As the final curtain slowly closes on that magnificent era of cinematic history, we are left with the enduring echoes of a legendary voice that refused to let the darkness win. Beyond the multi-million-dollar box office numbers and the glittering awards, the true legacy lives on in the millions of human hearts that still find comfort in that glorious madness. Which unforgettable collaborator on this legendary list surprised you the most when you discovered the secret warfare behind their classic scenes? Take a moment to step back into the golden days of your youth. Look back at the films that shaped your laughter and share your favorite memories in the comments below. Mel Brooks may have hated the exhausting process of working with these difficult geniuses, but the world will continue to love the immortal joy they left behind forever.